Hello, and welcome to the Mythgard Movie Club. We're here today talking about Captive State. I have to admit, I'm kind of impressed that we have almost as many people listening right now as we do panelists. Hopefully, a few more will join. But I I was expecting this movie to be around a little bit longer than it ended up being in the theaters. At least my theater. It only ended up being here for like 2 weeks. So I'm excited to talk about it. I liked it. I mean, there are certainly some problems. We can talk about maybe some of the issues and why it didn't maybe get as well received, or maybe it wasn't as well received, or whatever, as we talk through. But before we do that, of course, let's jump into some announcements. First of all, our summer semester is coming up really fast here. What are we, like, less than, like, just about 3 weeks away, right? A little more than
Yeah,
three
I
weeks
think
away.
about a little less than 3 weeks. Yeah.
Four really great classes. One of them brand new, The Inklings in King Arthur. Some of you may recognize that title from a award-winning book by our own Serena Higgins, edited by Serena Higgins, contributed by a bunch of people, including some other Signumites. We've got the class itself isn't like just following the book along. It's actually kind of taking some new territory, bringing some new territory in to the study and kind of looking at some things even I think that book doesn't look at, but definitely is an interesting class to be taking. Dystopian Tradition, really great class. I took that. I think I audited that when it was first offered several years ago. Looking at everything from 1984 to the Hunger Games and a bunch of stuff in between. Beyond Middle Earth. For anyone who's excited about the upcoming Tolkien biopic, maybe you could look at that class as well. I haven't actually taken that one, but it's taught by Dr. Corey Olson, the Tolkien professor, and Tom Shippey. So, I mean, it's going to be pretty good. It is pretty good from what I hear. And then Beowulf in Old English is our translation seminar on using Beowulf as a text and kind of for those people who've taken Anglo-Saxon to give them a chance to work through that. This summer, dragons are coming. We've got Mythmoot 6 down in Leesburg, Virginia. You can see the dates there if you don't know about it and haven't registered. Or if you know about it and haven't registered, do that. If you don't know about it, learn about it and then register. And that's going to be a lot of fun. I think it'll be interesting to see how many actually presentations are actually about dragons and all of that. I think this is the first year where we've had that specific of a theme or whatever. So I'll be really interested to see that. And then right now we have an Anytime Audit special. If you don't know about our Anytime Audit program, you can learn about that at signumuniversity.org. Basically, we offer some of our older classes in sort of a prepackaged format that lets you sort of learn at your own pace and just go through the materials on your own. Right now, we're offering Modern Fantasy, the first Modern Fantasy class taught by Dr. Olson way back in, I think, 2012, before Game of Thrones was a television series, I believe. And that's one of the reasons, of course, why we're offering that now, because the last season has launched there. Also, one of the other books is The Last Unicorn by Peter Beagle, and his birthday's coming up. So we thought this was a great time to offer that class as an Anytime Audit on a discount. Kat, over to you.
Previewing our next two sessions of the Mythgard Movie Club on May 30th. We will be talking about the 1967, I think, musical Camelot, which is based on part of T.H. White's The Once and Future King, which is based on Sir Thomas Malory's Le Morte Arthur. So if you've been following along with Corey's Mythgard Academy series on that, be sure to tune in. He will be joining us along with Chris Swank to talk about that. So very excited for that one. And then in July, we're actually going to bend our rules slightly and going outside our remit of movies to talk about the BBC and Netflix miniseries of Watership Down, which Corey Olson will also be joining us. He was I think, itching to have a venue to voice his responses, and suggested that we might want to do something with Movie Club, and we thought that was a good idea. So that is what we are going to do.
We'll have to call it AV Club or something next, although that might be problematic of a name.
Just a reminder, too, for people in the chat to put any comments or questions into the questions box throughout the discussion so that we can get some discussion and feedback and, share some of your thoughts and questions for the panel. And then I guess we can just each introduce ourselves really quickly. I'm Kat Sass, co-host of the Mythgard Movie Club and the academic coordinator for Signum. And I also co-host the podcast Kat and Kurt's TV Review with Curtis Wyatt, my co-host.
And I'll just go ahead. That's me. I'm Curtis. As Kat said, we have a podcast together and we co-host Mythgard Movie Club. I am the Dean of Outreach for Signum University, and
fancy title.
I know. I just tried to slip it in there without saying anything. But yeah, do some of the social media and all that too. So that's me.
I'll go next. I'm Dave, Signum alum and software engineer, and if you've watched one of these sessions before, I think it's my third or fourth time, so glad to be back.
And I'm Ashley Thomas. I am Signum alum as well as the convention coordinator at Signum. By day, I'm a freelance writer where I write at my blog, nerdyblogging.wordpress.com. I'm also now a staff writer at fangirlish.com, and I'm also a contributor at retros.com.
And Ashley has one of the coolest gigs writing about the new Game of Thrones season. So if you have some hot takes on there, you can go check hers out too and maybe start some conversation.
Yeah, I like talking Game of Thrones. I like talking movies. I'm excited about Captain State. So.
Yeah, this is a good one. Well, so let's jump into it. So one of the hard things about these new release films, right, is trying to get images that reflect what's going on, because you have to sort of resort to trailers, which are notorious for not wanting to reflect what's actually going on. So I really wanted to get like an image of like the computer from like the opening sequence, typing out like the instructions and stuff. But of course that like gives too much away of the plot and the situation. So I couldn't do that. But I wanted to start out just by talking, or I thought we could start out at least by talking about the situation, kind of, I guess, from the opening, I guess kind of the cold open of like the father, the parents and trying to escape the city, and then into this opening title sequence of, kind of explaining what's going on and sort of the lapse of 10 years of what's happening there. So, I don't, any thoughts there? Anyone want to jump in and kind of give their impression of the whole opening sequence?
It really gave me like a 1980s dystopian sort of feel. Now, I've only seen it once, and it's been ages since I've seen it, but it made me think of, for whatever reason, it brought to mind Escape from New York. If any of you are a little more versed in that, I don't know, just the look and feel of it. I also thought about it as in Dr. Sturgis's Star Wars class, we talked a lot about Star Wars as a silent film, and I thought it was really interesting. Like the opening exposition is all visually done. There's very little dialogue or anything that is explaining to you what's going on. I thought that was interesting.
So I've never seen Escape to New York. So what is it from New York?
Very
clearly
important.
I haven't seen it.
The direction is an important feature.
Proving that I've not seen it. So I guess, can you, Ashley, or anybody else, it seems like everybody else has seen it, maybe unpack a little more for me, like what you mean by that when you say that it like reminds you of that, or that like more broadly it has a kind of 80s aesthetic to what about the opening sort of made you think of those things?
Well, mostly for me, at least, it was the black screen, green typeface. It looked like a 1980s type computer system to me. Also, the feeling of being trapped. That is what evoked Escape from New York for me. Just needing to escape or get out. Curtis or Dave, if you guys are a little more well versed in Escape from New York than I am, you fire away.
I'm not, but I definitely agree that there was an 80s vibe to it. Like it reminded me of war games, with the black text with the green, and I agree with that aesthetic. I got that vibe too from the opening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I will, and it didn't make me think of Escape from New York, but as soon as you said that, like, I can see why it would. Particularly, so I mean, just the situation of having so Escape from New York, right? Kurt Russell he has to like go into New York, which has been walled off as a city, as like a prison, basically, like a citywide prison, and so just this idea of being, having these major cities being places where people are trapped, they can't leave for whatever reason. Obviously, very situationally very different in terms of this being sort of an alien occupation film, and that one's just more dystopian. This is how we're going to have so many people in prison that we need a whole city to encapsulate them. But in terms of sort of like the gritty urban city as a prison, and there's kind of no rules anymore, or at least in this case, it's with that opening scene with the dad who's a detective trying to escape, and then like you get to this point where like you're literally not allowed to leave or go beyond this area. So I can definitely see that. And then of course Gabe, throughout at least like the first half of the film, like that's the whole thing. It's like, how do I escape this city? And until it turns into, okay, now how do I get into the restricted zone and fight back? So I could definitely see that feel. I was when I first saw it, I think I thought of kind of a hybrid. So like there's sort of District 9 feel to it, I feel like, in parts of it, which also has that. I mean, it's kind of reversed, right? Because it's like the aliens are the ones restricted to a particular area, rather than aliens restricting people from a particular area. So there's like a reversal of concept there, but it's that idea of like, we've got this sort of dual existence happening, and as long as everyone kind of stays in their place, then we'll have a tenuous peace, so to speak. But when people sort of step outside of those bounds is when conflict and trouble starts to happen. And then there was another one I was going to say, but I can't remember off the top of my head what it was.
I hadn't been thinking of this in comparison, but a couple weeks ago I rewatched Children of Men too, which I feel like in some ways that has some very country based scene set pieces, but there's at least certain sections which are set in these kinds of refugee camps, which are a little more urban feeling and more decrepit. The buildings are falling apart and people are just kind of living in the slums and everything. So I mean, I feel like with all these movies about you're trapped in the city and it's falling apart, but you can't physically leave it. I mean, I think we're in kind of metaphor territory here, right? Like, I mean, probably metaphors for several different things, probably not all the same thing, but that seems to be a pattern of when you have kind of some sort of dystopian future where people are sort of ghettoized. It's in these kind of gritty, decrepit, gray, depressing urban spaces that people can't find a way out of or aren't allowed to leave.
Mm-hmm.
One thing about the opening scene, particularly the trying to escape from the city component, that I liked, is that I felt that really worked for me, like the immediacy of them trying to escape and ultimately the futility of it. worked for me and actually made me really excited for the rest of the film, which we can get into many problems with the rest of the film later. But like, I think I mentioned that here so that I can contrast it later in areas where I feel like the immediacy didn't work. But I think part of what part of the switch there that they make that caused me to kind of turn off from the vibe that I really liked in that early sequence was the 9 years later jump, which is both a large jump in time and also a bizarrely short jump in time for what they do in that period, which I think makes it's just a weird combination of like lack of action and then super immediate action that's going on in this film that's very jarring and I think possibly incoherent, but maybe let's come back to that aspect of it. But at least I can recall on my first watching, like you don't know anything about the film yet. So that first sequence like really sucked me in.
So one thing
oh, sorry. And I was just saying not only the sequence, but then like the parents dying in a red mist of just like that was completely like, I mean, you don't necessarily know what's going to happen, right? Like when they're there, like, are they going to be able to make it back or, maybe they're going to get killed. I was totally not expecting like this, just like shockwave of, destruction that came at them, which is obviously there for, to really pull you right into that. I mean, it goes along with what you were saying, Dave, about the immediacy, pulling you in right away to the like, oh, wow, stuff just got real, like without, a need to like go into like any kind of exposition or anything about how bad the aliens are or how many people they've killed or anything. It's like, boom, like that's it. Like you don't get a second chance with these people. Well, aliens are people too, as Doctor Who tells us. So, speaking of which, hold on. Sorry, I have a Doctor Who connection. I apologize, but the other movie I realized I thought of was Attack the Block. There's a surprising correlation without the humor, of course. But of course, Doctor Who jogged my memory because Jodie Whittaker, and of course John Boyega, and we have a Star Wars connection here too. Right. So I wanted to get that out there. I apologize, Kat. I should have let you talk.
No, not a lot of humor in this movie, which maybe could be one of the issues we might bring up. I had another thought, but I think Doctor Who scared it out of my brain. Once Doctor Who gets mentioned, I can't really think about anything else. So I have it. I got it.
And like so Doctor Who, if you talk long enough, you'll figure it out again.
There you go. So one of the other shows that we've talked about on our podcast separately from this is Battlestar Galactica. And just as Dave was kind of going over the premise there, it reminds me in conception of the kind of occupation mini plot of that show for anybody that's seen it. There's a kind of stretch of episodes where, you're on a planet and the bad guys land and now, and there is the same sort of jump, like, when we pick up, a season later, however a couple of years have passed, and you skip over the kind of like, how do we build a occupation infrastructure bit, and we get into the good stuff of now we're 3 years in or whatever, and a resistance has already been sort of built, and there are collaborators and there are resistance fighters, and there's tension between the two of them, which is separate from the tension with the overlords who've swept in. And I feel like it really reminds me but I think what's tough, I mean, it's one thing for the cold open, that kind of very strong jump in media res premise where you don't know what's going on, you're disoriented, and that opening scene is very kind of, like Dave was saying, very immediate and visceral, and you're just kind of swept up in the drama of it. The fact that you don't really know what's going on is kind of a strength. But then kind of as the plot unfolds, I feel like what we're missing, which is a strength of putting that story into a long-running TV show, is that we really don't know anything about the people at all. And, you know, I feel like this movie kind of continues beyond that first scene, maybe to hold us at a distance, maybe a little bit too much. I do think there is a virtue in mystery and in not patronizing your audience and not needing to over explain anything, and kind of, it's nice to kind of in some ways be teased and have to kind of fit the puzzle pieces together yourself. But on the other hand, I feel like starting with a cold open where we know nothing, and then jumping forward in time, and then kind of, we can talk about this in more detail, but continuing to sort of jump around to different characters and different plot lines. I wonder if that's a bit too much distance. Like, do we ever really get deep enough into the world to feel super strongly about what we're seeing, or care too much about any of the characters? I don't know. I wonder if that's sort of part of the issue is kind of trying to do this with a world and a character, you know, group that we just know nothing about.
Yeah. And I think you're right, and to some degree, because I mean, certainly, like, if we know nothing about the characters, we know like less than nothing about the aliens, right? Which brought to mind this quote that I found years ago from Orson Scott Card, and always sort of sticks in my mind whenever thinking about like insectoid aliens. Where, you know, he says that they've been long used in science fiction, and he was speaking specifically about Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers, the book, not the movie, although we have the movie depicted here. You know, but just this idea of, you know, the reason that sci-fi writers kind of use the insectoid alien, you know, the sort of nameless, you know, scary thing, is to highlight what the human action is, right? It doesn't even necessarily matter what or who the enemy is per se. I don't know that I wholly believe Orson Scott Card, because he went on to write many you know, sequels to Ender's Game, in which he does explore like who and what the aliens are. But like, just taking this quote at least at face value, you know, just the idea of that, like, at least for, you know, Ender's Game, like the importance there isn't like the makeup of what the, you know, the enemy is. It's just that it's some sort of nameless enemy. And I think we have that here. But kind of what I hear you saying, Kat, is like, we also never really get to know who the protagonists are, which is maybe a problem. Or at least not fully, or as fully as we could get to know them. Even like Jane Doe is Jane Doe, right? Like, she never gets a real name per se, and all the others have fairly generic names, you know, Gabe and Bill, and, you know, kind of that sort of thing, which is fine, but like, it also just sort of reflects on the genericness of some of the aspects of their characters, I feel like. They were actually really big.
There's an interesting tension though here of like, I'm curious what other people think about like this idea of the aliens as legislators or roaches, you know, like, you know, we kind of have these two names depending on your point of view of how you see the role of the alien invaders and everything. And roaches kind of, I guess, keeps you in that buggy alien tradition of, you know, Ender's Game and Starship Troopers and everything. But I mean, this idea of legislators kind of puts them in a very like bureaucratic and I suppose kind of intellectual role. Like, if you're legislating something, you must have intelligent thought and purpose behind what you're doing. It's not just, you know, animals invading you. It's something a little more purposeful and shadowy than that. So, yeah, I don't know. Like, I guess, what do you guys think? Like, is the mystery the point? Like, is it a strength to not get too deep into who they are and why they're doing what they're doing? Or do you feel like you would have liked to have seen more about them, you know, the aliens, or their purpose, or what's going on in the background with them?
I thought a lot about V when I watched this film. Uh, we have V, like the miniseries came out in the mid '80s, and it had a sequel miniseries, and then it had like a 1-season run of a TV show, and then it got rebooted in 2009, I believe, with Miranda Baccarin. But same concept. You have the visitors, and if you are anti-visitor, they're lizards. So it almost like using the name legislator or the name visitor makes it a little more human versus if you're a roach or you're a lizard. Those are decidedly not human. So it kind of affects, whichever one you use affects how you view the creatures.
So it tells us more about like us or the characters, the human characters, than it does about the aliens themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. You anticipated exactly what I wanted to say, which was that in the case, no, that's a good thing. In the case of the term specifically, like, I doubt very much that the aliens picked that word. Well, either word, obviously, but they wouldn't have picked a derogatory term for themselves. But in the case of the word legislators, like, they probably didn't choose that. It was, and we're not told one way or another, but in all likelihood, it was the bureaucratic humans that chose that, probably for, to project that very image for the aliens, not necessarily what they chose for themselves. On the question of, is it better to know what the aliens are doing or not, put me firmly in the it's best to not know camp. I always think alien movies ruin this, and they always do it crappy. Like in the case of Independence Day, a movie I love, but where he has the whole telepathic vibe, and it's so silly. Although shout out to Bill Pullman and Hornell, New York. But in any case, I never think it works. I think it's a lot more realistic, if you can call it that, to expect that we won't really know what their true intentions are. So I think the play is always to not try to explain it, and let the audience and let the characters infer what they think is best.
Yeah, not surprisingly, the Independence Day connection definitely popped into my mind too. I think, and that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about the fact that the aliens probably didn't choose the term legislators either. I mean, of course, you're dealing with translation issues here, right? Like we see, like there's like, the woman who's questioning, what's his name in the movie, Bill or whatever. Hearing you hear like the chittering sound or whatever, and then she like translates it and whatever. So yeah, who knows what they call whatever function that is. And you could imagine, like, because all of this was done, it was like all the world leaders who like give up, right, and sign like whatever treaty they have with the aliens. Like you can imagine there being like a PR session of like, okay, now what are we gonna call this, in order to put it in the best light possible. Well, they're the legislators, so like we have to listen to them. We have to do what they say, but that the aliens may not have thought about that. And yeah, I wanted to touch on a point too that Kat brought up of like the intelligence aspect of it, because like I do think that when you have these sort of mindless, insect creatures, like even something like Alien, where like you can think like the individual alien is like smart in terms of like hunting and going after its prey and whatever, but you don't think of it as like building a civilization that can like travel through the stars, right? It's like more of like a parasite in a lot of ways, or whatever. And I know there are stories out there that do have the aliens that can build spaceships and that kind of thing. I guess it's not wholly unheard of, but typically one of the points of having these sort of insectoid aliens is really to dehumanize them, and so this is like just going in that opposite direction completely. Not that it humanizes them, but at least on an intelligence level, it makes them seem more, intelligent and capable and all of that.
Well, and that's an interesting thing that I'm not sure what else to compare it to, that I feel like they try to go farther in both directions, which is an interesting tension. Like in some ways, they are more intelligent than comparable aliens that you see in other stories and movies. But on the other hand, it's not like they just make them more humanoid in that way. They also like live underground, and you never really see kind of what their civilization or their life is
Right.
like, and physically they're not um humanoid in any way. They they're very kind of bizarre and fish-like at times, and have weird, I don't know, anatomies that we can't understand the purpose of. So I feel like it's an interesting choice for the filmmakers to try to make them both more intelligent and purposeful than you expect, but also more animalistic than you might expect as well, physically.
Yeah. So while we're on this slide, Kat, can you go through like what all these, because these are not obviously all from Captive State. So can you just run through them all? Because I know some of them, but I actually don't recognize a couple. So
Sure. Well, Ashley had thrown a few things that it reminded her of in a document that we had going, and I was thinking about it too. So the bottom corners are from Captive State, but in the top left there, we've got the Starship Trooper being uh, grabbed by a bug, and uh, below that on the left-hand side is the spaceship from Arrival, which the aliens in that
Arrival.
are an interesting comparison. They're also very
Mhm.
intelligent and omniscient
I
in
haven't
some
seen
ways.
that one.
That's a good candidate for a future discussion.
Okay.
I won't get too much into it, but like I think just in terms of the spaceship, I mean not the shape of the ship itself, but just that kind of the way it's sort of vertical and kind of hovers over the water there. I think that's very reminiscent of the shapes on the right hand side that you see Gabe looking at across the lake here. Um,
Oh, although even the shape, though, I mean, it's kind of cocoon-like, right? Like you could
right,
like
yeah,
it's
like
an
it's
Mhm.
not
or an egg sac or something, you know.
it's not an
Mhm.
exact copy, but it's reminiscent, and
Yeah.
not your typical flying saucer. Let's put it that way. And yeah, kind of cocoon like, maybe connecting to the bug imagery.
Right.
Um, and then in the top right corner is what the Ender's Game movie did with the buggers. Um,
Right.
so, and then in the middle, Ashley had brought up, this isn't aliens necessarily, but she brought up a connection to Stranger Things and the is the upside down, is that what they call it?
Yeah, that's the upside down. And in this particular shot, that is Will is in a Demogorgon nest. And but the
Right.
Demogorgon itself, there's a lot of things about it that reminded me of the creatures, or the legislators, I suppose.
Yeah, and their kind of underground
Right.
dwelling, their
Right.
association with what's underneath and buried and kind of
Right.
lurking down in the dark corners of the world. There's a kind of similar connection there.
Mhm.
So how many of you thought of Star Wars when you heard Light a Match, Ignite a War? Specifically, The Last Jedi. I did.
I actually thought a lot about Rogue One as well.
Okay.
About the themes of like courage and hope and starting a rebellion. Um, I like
Sure.
that a lot.
And I mean, this is just occurring to me because I didn't think about Star Wars at the time. Although I see the connections now that you point them out. But the kind of similarly kind of suicide mission vibe to Rogue One. The fact
Mhm.
that whether or not that was the intent, they sort of both end in necessary sacrifice on the part of the resistance fighters, and also
Sure.
in order to kind of pass the torch to the next, whoever the next group of people are going to be.
Yeah. No, I mean, it was more the phrasing of that line that is so close. And I put the quote there from Poe Dameron, although it's repeated by a couple of characters, I believe, in The Last Jedi, of, being the spark that'll light the fire that'll burn the First Order down. I don't know how intentional that is. I mean, sparking a revolution. There's also, we get, where is it here? I have a copy of the Phoenix imagery, which of course, the Firebird from Star Wars, the Rebels, all that. So anyway, just thought that was some curious parallels. I don't know how intentional that was, but anyway. So yeah, speaking of sort of the plot, what was the plot? Because that's, if I have to say, like, my biggest sort of peeve is I had a lot of questions, and one of the reasons why I did want to watch it again, which I wasn't able to because it didn't stick around in theaters long enough for me to go see it again, was to do a better job of, like, actually trying to suss out, like, how on point the actual plot was as described, as we see. Obviously, we get different reveals. I also think there's some point of view issues with this in going back and forth between some of the characters, and how some of the information is revealed and stuff leaves a lot open for interpretation, I guess. But I wanted to get a sense of, like, yeah, what do we all agree on was the actual plot? And by plot, I mean not even like the plot of the movie, but like the plot within the plot, right? Like
I was just going to ask, do you mean the plot of the film or the plan of the...
I realized as I was talking I wasn't being clear. I mean, like, the plan. Like, what is apparently, the plan to fail, right? My biggest question is why? Like, why is that the plan? And I mean, I kind of get where they're going with it. I'm just not sure it works real well, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't think it does, but I think I can at least attempt to answer your immediate question. So, like, you kind of actually outline it fairly well here on the slide. Tongue in cheek, perhaps, but I do think
it's the old, like, slash dot meme, right?
Yeah, it's kind of a fair. The one quibble I would have, and I think this goes a long way to explaining your question, is with step one, the build a resistance network. I think the plan is essentially a reboot of their first plan. We don't quite get a good sense of what happened in Wicker Park, but we're taken to understand they tried to rebel, they tried to blow something up or something akin to that, and the plot failed, and they took heavy losses as a resistance. So step one, they didn't. So for this new plan, they didn't have to do step one because step one still existed, right? The whole conceit was that all of the previous resistance are not dead; they're still out there and around, or at least some of them. So,
right.
Given that they tried it one way, more of a straightforward resistance, and failed, plan B is let's try to get a guy inside, and I guess the best way to do that is to intentionally kill themselves in order to get their guy to be trusted enough to get close enough. Presumably that's the plan. I think it makes a little bit more sense to me, having just rewatched the movie today for a second time and really paying attention to that specific point. I still don't think it quite works, but it makes a little bit more sense if you try to remember or try to infer what may have happened in Wicker Park. They're not really clear on that, and I think that's one of the weaknesses of just trying to understand what the plot is of this film.
So here's a question I have that I feel like I made an assumption, but I'm questioning whether my assumption is, maybe this is obvious and we all thought it, or maybe I'm alone in this. It seems to me too like the key is this idea of the Trojan horse, which we can kind of talk more about that in relation to Jane Doe and everything. But I think that the part of the, a key part of the plan too seems to be this idea of, I mean, clearly we have Bill going down into sort of the bowels of the Upside Down there to go, take care of the legislators. But also we have Rafe being deported at the end. And I came out of the movie kind of thinking that was a key part of the plan, was get him deported, get him onto a ship. He's the Greek in the Trojan horse, going off to whatever colonies they have, or a homeworld or whatever, kind of being, infiltrated into that. But then I was kind of reading some, looking at some reviews and stuff today and hearing you guys talk. I don't know that everybody necessarily agrees with that. I think maybe also interpret it that Rafe genuinely tries to commit suicide and isn't successful and is just, unlucky in the end, and that he was another casualty of this plan that maybe only belonged to the highest levels of leadership. So, what do you guys think about that? Is he also, is his survival part of the plan, or was he supposed to go down along with everybody else? Because I imagine I thought he was on there with either some plan to blow things up or just taking his resistance to give it to other people, to recruit other people, to kind of try to spread it out into these off-world colonies as well.
I think it's a nice interpretation. I don't know that I buy it, and here's why. I don't think that anybody in the Resistance knows about Bill other than Jane Doe.
Sure.
And I don't know that anyone else on the plot thought that
at
the real
at
reason
least
of
until
the plot.
he gives Gabe the video.
Sure. All right. Yeah, definitely. I'll grant you that at that point. But that probably only extends to Gabe, and not to.
Oh yeah.
I mean, like the other folks who were actually knowingly executing the plan. I think in their minds they thought the plan was the plan they were executing, not the Trojan horse thing to get Bill into the tunnel. I could be mistaken about that, but that's how I read it. And in that reading, I don't see a place for Rafe off planet. And if that was the plan, and Rafe was aware that that was the plan, to get by which I mean to get him off planet, the whole him trying to commit suicide and Bill like stopping him by shooting him doesn't make a lot of sense. At least if the plan is to get Rafe off the planet as like a Trojan horse to the next planet, Rafe doesn't seem to be aware that that's part of the plan, if you know what I mean.
Sure. Now that's an interesting compromise. Maybe they are sending him off planet, but he doesn't necessarily know that they're counting on him continuing to resist and fight and recruit people. So it could be that he is part of the plan in a way that he just isn't aware.
Touche.
I feel like that's a lot of benevolent interpolation to sort of foist upon the movie. Because
I thought Rafe was like in on it the whole time, and he put on a show for Gabe's benefit and for the benefit of all the other collaborators sort of watching. But I don't know.
I saw it 3 times and that never once crossed my mind, but of course something like that could have easily slipped past me. I think it's an interesting idea for sure.
I feel like that would be a more interesting movie, definitely. Because here's one of my problems with the plan was like, what, going back to the ... success, right? Like, he goes down and destroys this one restricted area in Chicago. But like, we get the sense that there's like dozens or hundreds even of these across the world. Like, so does everyone employ the same tactic of like killing all like, does everyone within like, I don't know, a few days or weeks, like also destroy their entire resistance network in order to get someone on the inside who can then blow it up. And they all happen to have these, special, alien bombs that can turn transparent. And like, it's just like, there's so many things for that to line up. If the idea is like basically a war of attrition, which then the aliens say, okay, it's just too expensive to keep occupying this area, we're going to back off. That just doesn't seem like realistic to me. I mean, it's sci-fi, so I guess whatever. But like, it just doesn't. It doesn't seem like not every spark ignites a fire, right? Like some sparks just fizzle out and don't do anything. So, like, it doesn't seem to me that
a lot of things have to go right for this.
Yeah, like the narrative of the closing credits where like this does actually work. Like, is it because Chicago had like, was this like all the legislators were here and so that's why it works, which we don't get a sense of, or that it was somehow the main like home office, I guess, on, or like the main embassy on Earth or whatever you want to call it, like where, because of its importance in Chicago, like that does something, but we don't get that sense either. It's more like, oh, well, it happened here, so that idea spreads. And that to me is just like, well, but if the aliens are smart enough, wouldn't they notice what happened? Wouldn't they, like, in retrospect, realize what happened and stop it, like, in other places? I don't know. That was the sort of
right. Or
things that I was having trouble.
How can the idea spread if people don't know what the idea is?
Also true.
Which I think was part of my kind of generous interpolation, was that maybe more people were in on the plan. I wasn't assuming that only Jane Doe and Bill are the only single two people who know what's going on. I think I kind of inferred that, well, in order for this to spread and have a more widespread impact, there must be some sort of larger communication at work. I don't know. But I think, to your point, we don't get that confirmed. We would have to supply that ourselves.
Yeah, the implication is that communication is completely dormant, though, right? Like, that's the end of the opening title sequence, is like, this is the last message. Mm-hmm. And then that's like the message we see 10 years later when like Jane Doe is discovered, right? Is like, oh, this was the last message. So the implication is that there's no communication between the different cells, really.
I don't know. I thought of it less about like the logistics of, this is how we blow these critters up. It was more of they can be beaten. What's the quote that is it's fairy tales tell us not that dragons are real, but that dragons can be beaten.
Right.
For me, it was that kind of concept. It was less about the logistics of, is there are these factions all interconnected? Is there underground resistance in each city and they communicate somehow? But it wasn't that so much as like, oh snap, we can actually do something about these guys and we can defeat them.
I 100% agree. I think Ashley's hit on exactly the message that they're trying to convey, and I think it's best observed in the timeline that they give us. So that 9 years that goes by is 9 years from first contact. That's not 9 years from the end of whatever the first wave of resistance was. They explicitly say 9 years from first contact. So that within that 9 years, the aliens showed up. Apparently we had some sort of war or something with them that we ultimately gave up and lost on. And then they imposed this whole martial law thing, putting, bug implants in everybody apparently on the earth. And we've acclimated to this all within 9 years. In that timeline, there is no room for any real opposition to the aliens when they came. And I think that's one thing that that totally ruins the movie for me, because I don't find that the slightest bit realistic. I could, I've never been to Chicago. Maybe there are a bunch of fighters there. I could believe that Chicago gave up and was like, whatever, But everywhere in the world, that doesn't
I don't know.
hold water with me. Like,
all of the news reports of like gun violence and stuff in Chicago, I have a feeling that like there would be a few people taking at least pot shots at the aliens, right? Like,
yeah, that's fair.
They might hold out longer than most.
Also, it sounds like they only occupied the cities, because like the whole Gabe escape subplot is predicated on the fact. Well, I mean, maybe he doesn't actually know that this is true, because like he never gets outside the city. But like the whole concept was, his father at least was convinced that if they got outside the city and up north to their cabin, that they would be able to be able to escape from the aliens' notice. So like I could see that there's a potential for resistance outside the cities growing of different people moving around. It's a Red Dawn, Wolverines kind of thing, right? Like outside of like the occupied territory, it would seem like maybe a militia or two, at least in the U.S., would like form some kind of resistance. Whether it's successful or not, it's a different thing. But so I kind of agree there. But yeah, anyway, I don't know where else I was going to go with that. The lack of true resistance does, I guess, agree. Like I agree with what you were saying there.
Yeah, and I think that's the only way that the message of the movie, such as there is one, makes sense to me, is if the resistance folks just didn't believe that the world really gave it a legitimate shot to put up a real opposition, especially given what we do see about the aliens. They're not that hard to destroy, right? They fought the guy, the alien down in the, I know the one at the start of the movie seemed pretty formidable, but when he had to actually like go up against him down in the garage there, and kind of the, the big stadium scene, it didn't seem like they were that hard to kill. So it really seems like I could see where a resistance would be frustrated with humanity that apparently gave significant ground to an alien invasion within the space of a few years at most. And so it really does seem to me that the point is that humanity didn't step up. And maybe one of the reasons, I think perhaps this is tied to one of the slides I think that we actually passed about who's the protagonist in this film and how there doesn't really seem to be one. And I'm reaching a lot on this point, but at least for me as an individual, when I feel that I'm my best self when I express my individuality and stand up for my own rights, my own things that I value, and as part of a collective, when I feel like that those are less important, like I feel less impetus to act. Certainly for what I might see as a net negative for my own personally, and so there seems to be this idea in the film that kind of plays down the value of the individual, like both obviously in the community at large, but even within this cell, like we don't really learn who any of the names. I mean, I guess we got Bill Down and Gabe, right? I barely remembered those if you guys hadn't repeated them. But there really doesn't seem to be a focus in this film on giving a crap about any particular person, and I think that might feed into kind of the ethos of this film. I mean, what do you guys feel about that? What did you take away from that kind of vibe in the film?
I found the middle, I guess the middle section sort of disorienting. That kind of part where we switch from, we're kind of going back and forth between Gabe and Bill. So you kind of have like normal person in the world, sort of vaguely aligned with the resistance, but he's just kind of, he's your protagonist. He's your sort of average Joe POV character. And then you get, bad guy collaborator seemingly over here. And then there's that that switch where all of a sudden, for a good like half hour at least, it seemed, it drops them and spends all the time with Rafe and his resistance fighters going through the kind of procedural of what the plan is, right? Like kind of going from one to the other of like, we have to get these bugs out and we have to figure out how the bomb works and we have to kind of, make sure that people are in the right place at the right time, and then we have to infiltrate the stadium, and then we have to escape the stadium, and then we have to get on the buses or whatever. And suddenly kind of realizing, like, first of all, kind of being jarred that, wait a minute, I'm with this group of characters who I don't know what their names are, let alone what they're doing. And then kind of realizing we've completely dropped, like, I think we left Gabe back in the garage being surrounded by aliens, and we have no idea what happened to him. Like, we just completely left him in this moment of peril. And then kind of coming back to him and kind of feeling like, well, is it even, do I care what happens to him? What's happening with those resistance guys? Like, they're the ones who are like in the action. And I mean, I hadn't thought about it in the way that you stated it in terms of a loss of individual purpose and identity, but I guess that's kind of what it is. I can see how you would feel that way. Just structurally, I couldn't figure out, and I'm fine if, I think if we kind of decide this is an ensemble piece rather than about one kind of lead actor, that's great. I'm on board with that. But I don't feel like the people making this movie knew which of those they wanted to do. And they weren't clear on that. Like,
yeah.
Is this a story about the duality of this ordinary person and this collaborator? Or is it this big ensemble piece about the procedure of the resistance movement? And it seemed to kind of flip-flop between the two kind of randomly to me.
I agree with that, and that's I alluded to like some point of view problems earlier, but I think you articulated them much better than me just saying there were point of view problems. Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of that. All right. So I don't know if there is a protagonist. I mean, I guess like sort of ultimately, Bill is kind of, but
that was kind of my conclusion in the end.
But
was
so
that
is Gabe.
This was Bill's story.
Sorry, what was that, Ashley?
Oh, I said, but so is Gabe. Like I mean,
Yeah.
they feel like they share the spotlight. And I agree with your assessment. I kind of got lost in the middle the first time I watched the film as well. Like, oh, okay, so who are these people? And just didn't really have the context that I needed. So.
And that poor dog just left there barking.
I think that
sorry.
part of the issue, I think, from the protagonist's perspective, is that I couldn't really buy into any of the characters. Like, I guess I kind of identified with Gabe, but to be honest, I didn't really feel like I was rooting for anybody in this film, except for that 30 seconds when we see the home video, right? That's suddenly you care about somebody because you, at least for me, see them as individuals rather than as rando, nameless people who, are sacrificing themselves for no clear purpose, at least in my view. Primarily going back to the reasons that Curtis said about how it doesn't really seem that there's a good strategy for this beyond this one city, right? Okay, we blew up this one town. Now, how does this strategy go on? It doesn't make a lot of sense. But in any case, like, in order to like the characters, I had to wait all the way until the very end of the film. Right. And that's a horrible way, I think, to get an audience to buy into your characters. Sorry, Kurt, I interrupted you. You were going to say something.
No. I was going to interrupt you, but I think Yes, I agree with that. And like it is like the scene at whatever is like a birthday party or barbecue or whatever is interesting. So the plan of like killing your entire resistance network, it's just doesn't leave much of a safety net for you. Like your bank and like okay, fine. We're
Spoken like a
desperate.
collaborator.
We're desperate to like, get this to work, but like surely there's something between, nobody dying and killing literally everyone who's on your side in order to, take this one shot at them. Like couldn't maybe a few notable people like okay, fine, there's cannon fodder in every war. So like yeah, the mechanic and, the guy with the dog, like, okay, they're gonna have to die. Like we know that. They think they're doing something really important, but we know they're gonna die, and that sucks, but you have to make hard decisions as a leader, right? But like literally all the entire network has to like be killed. Couldn't he have possibly, have said like, well, we believe we found the entire network, but secretly no, there's still some out there. Well, who else is going to know at that point? He's the leader. Like he's the one in charge. Like I don't know. It just I don't buy it. I don't buy that would be a good tactic. But I don't know.
This is why intentional deportation makes far more sense to me.
Sure, and I think if I thought that was actually in design, I would think that would be a great idea. I just don't think that it occurred to any of the filmmakers.
Sure. And I think, again, why I assumed there are more resistant, like, I think my brain just wouldn't let me consider the idea that this was everybody. Because I agree, if this is everybody, that makes...
I mean, at least in Chicago, that's what I get the sense of. Like,
sure,
I mean...
Sure.
Because, I mean, the other thing is we don't actually know, like, maybe other cells were successful at not killing everybody in their networks.
Right.
Maybe they somehow figured out, oh, wait, we saw what they did. And it's like, the first generation of the iPhone. Apple figured out a better way to make iPhones, like, later. Like, maybe the other cells were able to figure out a better way to kill roaches / legislators.
I think it's really interesting that while you all are really tackling like the structure of the film and like the logistics and little bits and pieces of how everything is working, I saw that film 3 times, and the one thing that really resonated me was not necessarily like, oh, why didn't they do this, or why didn't they do that, or does it make sense for them to do this? It was, for me, it was the emotion that the film evoked. Things about like courage and fighting for the people that you love. And so like when the video at the end, I got hit in the feels really hard. Because it wasn't about preserving society for them. It was about preserving society for the next generation. I think it's really interesting the lines, and you all can help me suss them out a little bit, but the line in the video that Bill says, teacher or a cop, choose one, and then whatever you are, be a good one. So just thinking about thematically how that works with Gabe, he's just kind of out for himself at first, and then he's realizing that he needs to step up and be a leader in some way. So is he a teacher, or is he somebody like Bill, who's the cop who's having to infiltrate and stand in the gap and protect somebody in some way like that? I just think it's a very interesting idea.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Bill, came the closest to me for the characters feeling well developed enough that I felt something at the end when we get the reveal of. I mean, I kind of was looking for a twist with Bill. So maybe psychologically I was a bit prepared. I was kind of like waiting for, all right, this guy's a bit ambiguous. So what are we going to find out about what he knows and how he's involved? So, I mean, I won't say I like predicted the ending, like I wouldn't go that far, but it kind of felt fitting when we get the reveal. And I felt like we had enough time with him and had enough of kind of what he was up to that I did feel kind of the emotion of that. And the twist kind of made sense on a, I guess, both a plot and an emotion sort of level. And I wish I felt that way about the rest of the characters. I think just having the times that we kind of just dropped out from Gabe entirely kind of stopped me from that and not learning. I mean, I kind of like the ensemble of the Resistance, how like they're kind of different from each other and you could kind of, they're distinct enough, but I didn't really feel like I knew about them and closely enough to really feel a big emotional impact when they give their lives for the cause and that sort of thing. So I think, from speaking for myself, the logistics is sort of what you end up focusing on when you're not emotionally engaged. Like I think if I did feel more strongly, I wouldn't necessarily be as distracted by the planning aspects of everything.
I would agree with the sentiment that that the emotion I thought was well communicated. And I think partly that was due to the strength of the acting. That's one thing I actually did quite like in the film. I mean, John Goodman is flawless in absolutely everything he is in. I couldn't speak more highly of an actor. Everything. I will defend the worst movie he's ever made. I will defend it. And the kid who plays Gabe as well, and Rafe. I liked all three of those guys. And Jane, she didn't have a lot of screen time, but I thought she was really effective. So I really liked the acting. I thought they communicated the emotion well. I thought the I guess the set design and stuff like that, it was really evocative of claustrophobic kind of urban decay vibe that I really got off of. So I appreciated that aspect of it. One thing that, though, I hate to keep harping on the plot thing, but another aspect of it came back to me that I tell you what, I will skip my rants about how the technology is totally ridiculous, but I will set that aside. Consider yourselves lucky. But one thing I do have to say that really troubled me about the ending and about the message that they're trying to send is that ultimately, number one, they talk about the value of the people who care about each other, and trying to be part of that community. When Bill says to Gabe in the video, be a teacher, a cop, pick one and be a good one. That whole thing. It's a nice sentiment, but it also is essentially, I don't think he means it in this way, but the words literally are telling him to be one of these things that you are predestined to be based on your family, which is not really, I guess, doesn't resonate with me as somebody who would prefer to, pick my own destiny rather than have it foisted on me by my prior generation. Number one, so it doesn't respect my autonomy as an individual. It does the opposite of that. And number two, the whole plot pretty much presupposes that the way to win is to be an insider and collaborate, but you're going to feel the strength of your conviction so much that ultimately you'll go through with your suicide. That does not really instill like a desire to resist. The message is telling you the opposite. Is like, if you're not an insider, don't even bother, because you're going to lose unless you've got an insider who's going to do something for you. That's what it's telling you, and I think that's a horrible message.
I've seen a lot of children's books with that message. Be a collaborator and commit suicide.
Right? But the problem with being a collaborator is that you never do that. Collaborators don't do that.
No. Yeah, and
it happens in real life.
Yeah. I mean, there's the occasional whistleblower, but yeah.
Right. I mean, the piece is about when early in the Trump administration about like the anonymous think pieces about how they're inside trying to bring it down from the inside and everything. That's kind of,
Right. Yeah.
you know, I mean, on a different scale, but that's kind of what that makes me think of, and how um, effective, is that really? Um, that's open for debate.
I think it's definitely open for debate considering the last decade of political history in this country with Snowden and Julian
Hmm.
Assange and
Hmm.
so on. I think I think it's pretty safe to say at this point it hasn't made a whole lot of positive change, unfortunately, uh, from my personal view, which is kind of sad. Is there anything positive we can say at an hour and 45 minutes in to make this a cheerier recording? What was a funny thing? Was
So,
there anything funny or
There wasn't
uplifting about this
anything
film?
funny. I like there to be, what's the Joss Whedon quote about like, make them cry, make them think, make them feel, but like for the love of God, tell a joke.
yeah.
Like I think we could have used a couple jokes.
Yeah. No,
Not that it needs to be a dramedy or anything, but like part of creating a kind of realistic world, which I think this movie wants to do, is trying to do like a realistic depiction of what this kind of alien invasion would be like. And part of that of the world is that there's always lightness, there's always some sort of humor, and that's part of character and your world building and everything.
yeah, and
I
not even
miss that. It's a bit dour, this movie.
like even amongst the few like friendly relationships that we see, like even like we don't even see like Gabe joking with I can't even think of her name, whatever his like girlfriend's name is there. Like you would think there'd be something, but even that's like relationship fraught with turmoil. It feels like the little bit that we get of it. Not to mention the creepy spying aspect of it from
Mhm.
Bill's perspective, but yeah, there's zero humor at all in this movie, which I agree. I want to poke Dave the Bear a little on the technology thing because I I mean I don't know what Dave's going to say specifically. I know him
Careful
well enough,
where you're going with this.
but I know him well enough to guess where he might. No, I thought it was interesting to have this idea of the legislators have um, outlawed certain forms of what we might call higher tech kind of stuff, cell phones and that kind of thing. And they're going through all the, like now there's this like backlog of confiscated cell phones and data cards and from computers and stuff. And so I think that's why you get this like 1980s feel from the
Mhm.
technology, because that's like people dug out their old 386 computers. That's probably even too late for 1980s, but like you know and are using cell phones with quarters because that like for some reason that still works. All like I kind of thought of it as like because like the legislators probably just overlooked it. Like they took away whatever the immediate current smartphones and like things that were like you know they assumed were like the real communication things, and sort of left all of whatever infrastructure was left there. And so yeah, there happens to be like some old payphone on the corner, and that's what they used because the legislators just never bothered to like think about it and turn it off or something like that. But I don't know. Dave clearly had a problem with it, and he's a software engineer, so I want to hear what he has to say on that topic.
All right. All right. Well, you asked for this for the record. All right. I agree with you that the whole confiscating of tech part I liked. I thought they did that well. there's two points I want to make on this theme. So one has to do with the confiscation of tech, and the other has to do
point one, part A.
That's right, in 37 sections. No, so remind me if I forget. So the second one has to do with the drones. Okay, so I'll come back to the drones in a minute. But okay. In the point of the confiscating stuff, I liked the aspect of them confiscating stuff and then having to go back to the tech. I think you described that beautifully. I don't have any qualms with that. The job that Gabe has makes no sense. All right, they've confiscated all these cell phones, and now what? They want to collect everybody's old photos? What the heck for? It doesn't make any sense, number one. Number two, the data that they're going to get off of that, what are they going to do with that data? Number three, that data already exists or would have existed on, servers all over the country. Google servers and such, wouldn't they have access to that stuff there? Like, it doesn't seem to be, and they don't give us a reason for why they're collecting that data other than that they're doing it. Okay, like, it seemed pointless other than to give Gabe an opportunity to play that video. Like, that all that aspect I didn't think there was a rationale for it, and it was weird. Do you have an explanation to that?
My response to that would be building roads during a potato famine kind of thing. The whole point, one of the points, right, is that the legislators, where was it? The state of our union is strong, right? Unemployment is its lowest in history. Why? Because everyone's doing make work. Like, that could very easily be. Now, I'm not confident the filmmakers thought of it that way. like Rafe on the dock being a plant for, going to the alien homeworld would have been a great plot point, but I'm not convinced anyone thought of that. I'm not necessarily convinced that they thought of, like, Gabe working in a factory where he has to, like, manually punch holes in, smart cards after uploading the data. Because you're right, like, there's probably way better and easier ways to do it. Other than the fact that, like, how do they get, unemployment so low? They have these manual jobs that don't actually need to exist, but it gives people something to do. And presumably, therefore, keeps them busy and not, resisting rebelling. Or whatever. Yeah, rebelling. That would be my totally, like, retrofitted explanation. I don't necessarily think that's part of the narrative per se, but I think you could make that argument. I don't know if that absolves your issues with it, but.
No, not in the slightest, but you gave it a shot. I applaud the effort.
I mean, I thought about the cards as like, instead of, like, nowadays, I mean, yes, this is set in the future and we think about everything through the lens of, like, the smartphone or the tablet or something like that, and everything's on an SD card or something, or a SIM card. I was thinking it more of, like, this is like a digital camera or video camera or something like that, and it's not actually connected to the web or anything like that. So maybe they're looking for data of any kind of resistance movement or anything like that.
We're preventing people using it in the future, like you said, like even if they can get the data in the cloud or on servers or whatever, like, it's, even just the camera itself or the memory card could potentially be useful. So it's somebody's job to destroy them all. Right.
Yeah, and you can imagine, like, jackbooted thugs going house to house collecting, like, all of that old, like, digital stuff that isn't necessarily current things that are connected to Google and cell networks and all of that. But, I mean, I've got sitting on my desk over here, I've got, like, old videotapes that I've been meaning to, like, convert to, like, newer digital media for probably 10 years. But you can imagine that sort of thing. Like, they just go and collect everything and upload it to wherever. Who even know? I mean, the other ridiculous part of it, if I'm like taking Dave's side of it to switch over for a minute, is, like, why do they even give people the choice of whether or not to upload something? Like why is Gabe the screener of the information, as to whether or not it's valuable to the legislators? he shouldn't have the option to delete anything if like you're really creating that system in a way that should be useful to them. But you know,
I'm glad you've seen the light. That
I
makes no
haven't.
sense.
I'm just saying. If I were to take your side, I would have brought up that point. But since you didn't bring it up, I win.
So what's part B?
Okay, so my other technical qualm is with the drone technology.
Oh, right.
You know, they had the whole collar where they put the collar on and then suddenly you can't read them, and then the aliens go, oh, I don't know where this guy went. Well, he's probably not important. It's all good. Like that's totally ridiculous. Any alien that's smart enough to make us, you know, to come to our planet, have technology to do that, and then have this swarm drone technology and tracking, has the ability to detect anomalies like that and then act on those anomalies. So like the whole subplot where he's able to like hide his presence and then go into the Wicker Park, take his collar off, and suddenly they're not able to track him now because he's in there. That doesn't make any sense. He can talk to his brother, put his collar back on, go back out, and then like reappear in the system, and nobody's the wiser that he was ever gone. That makes no sense. I could write a program that would detect that as an anomaly and then do some action. So an alien presence certainly could do that. The whole drone technology would have killed this resistance way before if it was, you know, in any way realistic to what we could do today with drones, advanced drones, let alone an alien civilization with drones. So that whole thing was a killer for me as well. It just, they didn't take 10 minutes to come up with a drone thing that was realistic. So they should have either left it out or, you know, did a little bit more research on it. So that's my drone qualm.
Again, I think we're having a structure versus emotional reaction. Whereas vocationally, I am strictly in the humanities. I think a lot about what storytelling is supposed to make us think and feel, and how it comments on humanity and things that we deal with as humans. And then here's Dave, this technology is completely unrealistic. So for me, it doesn't matter. I don't care, because of what the emotion of, oh snap, they're coming for me and this hides me. Okay, I can roll with that. Versus, oh no, my collar's off, they can track me now. Like it's that feeling of I'm on the run. And that was more important to me than thinking logistically how that worked.
You're in the like Arthur Clarke, science and magic are basically almost indistinguishable. Like seriously, like mm-hmm. I think Dave's probably right that they thought about this for all of 10 minutes, because mm-hmm. clearly like the realism of the, you know, the engineering behind it wasn't a priority for them. And so what is the priority? It's, you know, kind of technological MacGuffins, you know, and you know, I don't even say that like in a pejorative way, like, you know, the technology does what they want it to do to service the moment of the story. Right. And I don't think they were necessarily thinking of it in terms of what would be technologically possible even today. Mm-hmm. I think they're maybe inviting themselves for criticism though, because it, you know, so much about the aesthetic of the film is this kind of like gritty realism that seems like it's 5 minutes in the future. And
right,
I don't know that they're wrong for thinking of wanting to do it in a less realistic way, but I think maybe I'm not surprised that people who have the technological knowledge are poking all kinds of holes in this, because mm-hmm. everything about the film kind of tells you, I guess just on a kind of visual level, that's something that seems to be a priority, even though it's not for the filmmakers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm not saying that those are not fair criticisms. I just think for me, I just came at a completely different perspective. Is like, how is this movie making me feel? What are the was my thought process going through this film, and how does this film like I don't know, like make me want to change or be different for having watched it. And it's not the mechanics of how does this tracking gadget work, or you know, why are we smashing SD cards for a living?
And I think that's a fair point. I think, you know, for any individual, like there's going to be different things that sort of pull you out of or draw you into, you know, the secondary world of it. And for some people, it's going to be the super technical things. For others, it might be the plot things. For others, it might be the character things. Like, well, that character's actions don't reflect correctly on, you know, or correctly, like they don't flow naturally from like how we've seen them act before. So like, it doesn't make sense to me. So I think, yeah, that's why we try to have panels with like people with different viewpoints. So I think that's totally, you know, a fair way to look at it. I think for me, knowing Dave's line of work and that he's actually worked a lot with drones and, you know, programming like those sort of like automated systems, it doesn't surprise me that that's a sticking point for him. That wasn't a sticking point for me. I actually thought the technology was fairly well overall, kind of based on some of the earlier stuff I thought. And I thought it had an interesting mix because they did have some of the alien technology, but then like the older tech that they had to sort of make do with, but then also like the cob job. I actually liked the collar thing, although I see why it could be problematic. Like I didn't have as big of an issue when I was watching the film. Like when they had it on, when they had it off, could it actually detect? I wasn't thinking about that kind of thing. But I do see like how, like to compare it to like another movie we're going to talk about later in the year, like The Fifth Element, like we're not going to criticize the technology in that film because it's just like funny, weird stuff, right? Like there's all sorts of, you know, crazy tech that it's like, it's a more fantastical sci-fi kind of thing. I mean, maybe Dave will criticize it if he's on our panel for that, but maybe we just won't invite him to that one. But no, like that's a sci-fi film, but like the technology in it is so bizarre and weird, and it's more like fun and whatever that I don't think we'll have the same view of it as we do like the tech in this, where like Kat said, it's more gritty and realistic, so to speak. And so you would expect the technology to work, even like futuristic technology to work in like the ways that the current, at least in how current technology works, if not better, right? Mm-hmm. So I can see why some people might have that issue with that. Although I again didn't really personally myself. I thought that the tech, the portrayal of tech was actually one of the stronger points of the film, which maybe Dave doesn't disagree with either, but that doesn't say a whole lot.
Bowing his head and
yeah, I don't disagree with that. One more point, and then I'll stop being a you know, a complainer about the tech, which is I would agree with you. I'm not the sort, well, maybe I'm the sort, but I wouldn't overly criticize the tech in Fifth Element. But I'll tell you one reason why it bothered me here, and it wasn't just that it was unrealistic, although that was part of it. It was more that going back to the comment I made about the futility of fighting these aliens, like that was kind of implied in the whole plot, was that these guys are so technically sophisticated, we might as well just collaborate with them immediately when they show up on our planet. And then they show such deficient tech that it made it troubling for me to then buy into the whole premise that we had to immediately acquiesce to their power. I think that was what really got me about those things with the tech.
Mm-hmm. Right. If there's so many weak spots in their armor, then why is it taking us this long to muster a resistance movement? That's a fair point.
And we don't actually know enough about aliens to know, is there a hubris thing going on? Like, yes, it's possible to write something that would detect that, but maybe they did. Like, I mean, people, you know, Facebook stored passwords in clear text files for years and years. So like, just because something can be done doesn't mean that the people who designed the system did it the right way. but like that's total crit fic. Like I don't like. There's no way to know because we don't know enough about the aliens, right? Maybe they just never thought that humans would be smart enough to like defeat their technology, and so they never put that particular check in.
Hmm.
They should have hired Dave. So we've covered a lot of stuff. I'm trying to think of like where maybe we've skipped over some things. I guess so. I mean, we've all given a lot of responses here. The overall response to this was clearly pretty mixed. I mean, initially I liked the movie, but also came out of it like I feel like I need to watch it at least one or two more times to like, process some of the things, especially with the reveal, because I think kind of going back to what Kat was saying earlier, there's almost like C.S. Lewis's surprising versus surprisingness to it. Like I don't know, not having rewatched it, like how much of the like reveals are actually have the surprisingness factor of like, does it work the second time through? Or is it just kind of like, there's some cool or interesting or at least notable reveals that happen, but like if you know them watching the second time. So I guess I'd look to those of you who have seen it more than once. What was your thought about, do the reveals work as well the second time through, or is it kind of like a one shot, thing?
Well, I saw it 3 times. Okay.
Is my question clear though too? Like, because I feel like I rambled a little bit. So let me know if like you're like, Curtis, what the heck are you talking about?
So just to clarify, then you're asking like, are the big reveals in the film like the video at the end, that Rafe is alive? Do they work as well?
Or does knowing that Rafe is alive work as well? Like when in the beginning they're seeing like his image, on all the walls and everyone thinks he's dead, and or just even knowing that like Bill is like constructing this plot, or maybe not constructing at this point, kind of working through this plot that is sort of set in motion already. Those types of things. Yeah. Does it work? Like, does knowing that in advance, to clarify my C.S. Lewis comment too, I just sort of assume everyone knows this at Mythgard, but maybe not. In An Experiment in Criticism, he sort of talks about the difference between a surprise, like a plot twist or something like that, versus the idea of surprisingness, that even though it's coming, because you've read the story before or whatever, like it still works within the context of the story in the way that maybe it's revealed to the characters, or even as it's revealed to the reader, it still kind of works as something that evokes a sense of surprise, even though you kind of already knew it was coming. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right.
I think for me, like
the value of like the rereading and everything, like surprisingness retains its quality of surprise, even though it's not a surprise to you, the repeat viewer.
Right. I think for me, like, I saw the film 3 times. I, of course, definitely surprised at the end first time. Second time, it made the film more interesting to me to watch, to try to see how Bill was functioning in his role as the inside man, and also knowing more about Jane Doe and thinking through, her sacrificing herself in that way, like, literally giving her body for the cause, in her role as a prostitute, like, versus, her vocation was a teacher, like all of that was just, it was very emotionally impactful for me. And then, like, again, with Bill, just watching not only his actions, but like what he says and the reason he chooses to do certain things that appear villainous. in some way, I think for me at least, it worked. And again, that's me getting wrapped up in like the emotions that the film is trying to evoke, of courage and hope and resistance. Those things, at least for me, are very powerful on a personal level, because I'm a Gryffindor. I want to be brave. So if that makes sense.
Sure.
For me, on a rewatch, I would say that the plot made more sense because it was easier to follow since I knew it was going to happen. I 100% I think Ashley nails it in the case of Bill and Jane for me as well. Like their the poignancy of kind of their situations, I think hits you a lot better on the rewatch, because you can pick up on a lot more nuance than you can the first time around. The emotional and the ambiance didn't hit me in the same way as it did in the first rewatch. I totally agree with Ashley and valuing that. I think this is one thing that the film does well, and it does it so well, in fact, that in my first watch I found following the specifics of the plot, by which I mean like the suicide scheme, really difficult to follow, because I did have this kind of visceral and emotional reaction to much of the film, which I was able to set aside in the rewatch and focus more on the specifics. And so I think it is a film that is worth rewatching for that reason, because you can get very different things. At least I did on the rewatches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could see. I only was able to see it once, but I could see that with the Bill and Jane Doe relationship. I mean, I kind of maybe wish we'd gotten more of her anyway, but the first time kind of trying to figure out, like, as I said, kind of wondering what was going on with Bill. I didn't know what it would be, but having a sense of, okay, there's something else here. I kind of definitely the first time through had the sense that, not necessarily knowing that they were in cahoots, I still felt that there was something genuine there with, at least on Bill's part. You had the sense of like, now he could be totally deluded, but at least for him, there's a real connection, which is like, I think kind of a trope of the, hooker with a heart of gold thing of like really she may do what she does with everybody, but she and I have something special, that like,
Sure.
So trying to kind of figure out what is Bill's connection and feeling with that, and how far does he take that, and how seriously does he take that for himself. So I can totally see how rewatching it, you bringing the knowledge that they are totally in sync with each other and in on the plan, and they're the masterminds behind the plan. I can totally see how that would add a different layer of poignancy to the fact that they know their time is coming short at the end there.
Yeah. Yeah, and kind of what made me think about that is one of the early reviews that I read after I saw it. I don't remember exactly how they put it. Talked about how the movie almost begs to be a cult classic rather than, a successful theater classic, partly because of that rewatch value, and not even value, but almost necessity of needing to rewatch it. And so it was not a commercial hit, as we all now know. In fact, I mean, it made significantly less than even the production budget, not including the marketing budget, according to the trusty Box Office Mojo website. And the reviews were mixed. But I think I wonder if like in 5 or even 10 years, if we're going to be talking about this like we talk about Blade Runner or something that also didn't, do as well as it could or should have been, done in the theaters and that kind of thing.
Right, and
I wouldn't
mean,
be surprised.
For a movie that kind of is designed to not be totally understandable on the first viewing. Now, I think again we can quibble as to how successful it is in achieving that, but that's the sort of design. I can see what they kind of mean by this. It's not shooting for a kind of box office success. It's shooting for word of mouth and something that, maybe gets passed along because your friend saw it and said it was interesting, and takes on a kind of life of its own. Which, time will only tell whether or not that happens. I doubt it, I have to be honest, but hey, prediction is a dangerous business. So we'll see.
Sure.
If I was a betting man, I'd agree with Kat. I think it's worth a rewatch. I don't think it's going to be quite the cult classic level of rewatch, and I think that's because I don't think the political message is coherent enough and applicable enough to our time. I'd love to be proven wrong. I'd love somebody to explain in a way that makes sense to me what the message is that they're really trying to convey in a way that I could buy into it. But for me, anyways, that's what stops this from elevating, because there's so many other things that are worth worth appreciating in the film, that the fact that, for me anyways, it doesn't have that piece. It's a really important piece for this film. So to miss that note, I think is a deal breaker for me. But it was worth at least the second watch.
Another thing which I hadn't really realized until I read this in the Variety piece today, which I think is worth mentioning, is there does seem to have been some studio sabotage in terms of this film's success, that they pulled their critic screenings without explanation before the open, and as Curtis,
because they thought it would do bad.
Well, I mean, no, that's not fair though, because plenty of things that go on to achieve that cult status were killed in the cradle. Firefly being a beloved example. I mean, maybe they thought it wasn't good. Maybe they thought it might have been good, but they knew it would get panned, or that nobody would see it. I mean, or they thought they knew. Who knows? We can only speculate as to the reasons, but and I think it doesn't prove there's plenty of things that probably have been sabotaged and weren't that great either. I don't think that proves anything either way. But anyway, they did kind of cancel these critic screenings, and as Curtis kind of noted, it unless you're blessed in an area where there's like a ton of movie theaters, chances are that this one maybe either didn't make it to you or didn't stay very long. So we have to take into account some of those practical factors when we kind of look at something's success too.
Sorry, I'm just realizing I'm looking at this and I realize I forgot to change the title to this slide. And so we have, I had copied and pasted this from our predestination discussion of Ethan Hawke saying, I had a lot of fun trying to figure it out.
I noticed it because I feel like the quote kind of still stands. Maybe Hawke wrote a review of Captive State, and he's like, you know what? I had a lot of fun trying to figure it out.
That's just poor editing on my part, but it kind of works because I think we've had a lot of fun trying to figure it out. I don't necessarily want to end early if we don't have to, but I feel like unless there's anything more to say, maybe we'll just go one more time around and any final thoughts on where we're at. I think we've all sort of, I mean, I'm willing to wait and see if it becomes cult classic or not. I kind of agree with Kat and Dave though, that it seems unlikely and would have to be, unless there's a super secret plot to make it, become cult status at some point. I don't think it's going to reach it there. But who knows? Maybe there'll be a spark that will ignite that fire. So yeah, final thoughts on the film. We'll start with Dave.
Final thoughts: flawed, but I'm always up for a John Goodman film. The man is a brilliant actor.
Truth.
Ashley,
Ashley, go ahead.
So I have a reputation among my friends of being the friend. I will watch anything. Um, I don't care what it is most of the time. I'm probably I'll sit down and watch it. And in the past maybe 7 or 8 years, I've kind of sat down and I've given myself like a science fiction film education just because I had a lot of gaps in I still have a good many gaps in my genre film knowledge. Um, Starship Troopers being one of them, but yeah, I know. Kathy,
That one's okay. That's an okay gap to have.
Okay, all right. But one of the things I enjoyed about Captive State is I felt like it was very knowledgeable of the genre, and I feel like it sits well. I'm going to lean a little more positive on the cult film status as somebody who enjoys watching lots of ridiculous cult film. But I think it's a little better than that, though. I think it definitely has potential. Maybe if some marketing had been different, or other things had been a little different, like within the film. I think overall it's still really good, and even with the I think one of the things that you guys saw in our notes, me trying to figure stuff out, like, oh, this reminds me of blah 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 and blah 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 and blah blah blah, and I had 20 other like films and television shows that it made me think of.
Sure.
And so for that, at least for me, that holds a lot of rewatch value. So I'll watch it again. And I like John Goodman too. He's a good guy.
Kat?
I will say that I agree that there are very strong aspects, and the performances and some of the setting and the tone and the kind of staging of it and everything. As a whole, I don't think it all holds together. I think it kind of tried to be all things to all people. I wish it had kind of committed, if it was going to go for the gritty realism, then it might have done its homework a little bit more. And if it was going to go for the ridiculous cult classic, then I don't think it was ridiculous enough. Like, I think it kind of tried to split the difference in a few too many directions. So I think I kind of feel like that holds it back from being too much of anything for me. So I wish I wish I emotionally felt more strongly about it in either direction, either as a very enjoyable kind of cult piece or as something very emotionally kind of deep and intellectual. But for me, it kind of falls in that middle ground. So, I mean, it's certainly worth a good watch. And I think Ashley's right that it does a good job of kind of being part of its tradition and kind of pointing you towards other things and maybe being in conversation with other movies and stories and stuff. So I think for that, if nothing else, it's worth watching as a kind of, what does this kind of movie look like at this point in time, and how is it responding to other things?
Sure. Yeah, and so for my own part, I guess I do plan to watch it again at some point. I was not able to see it more than once, just because I do want to. I am kind of curious as to how well it holds up, knowing what you know after the first watch. But yeah, strong acting. I thought we didn't actually. I know we didn't talk a ton about like the actual, cinematography and some of the techniques used. I thought I don't know what that quote was about, like poor editing. I actually thought editing and like some of the photography direction and that kind of stuff was actually really good. So those aspects I thought were great. Acting was great. There's worse films that look better. So we'll see, I guess, in the long run. But yeah, cool. Well, thank you all for joining us tonight, and thank you for our stalwart attendees. We will be back again. Remember, at the end of May with Camelot. So that one will maybe be more fun. I've actually never seen it, so I don't know if that one's. Hopefully, it'll at least have a little more humor than this movie does. But yeah, we're looking forward to that one. It'll be a very different conversation. It'll be our first musical, and which
People
Kat
burst into
is
song, if
super excited about. I'm less so, but I'll power through. But anyway, thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.